Oh dear, oh dear. Nothing new in the world, is there?
What is new is that things blow up.
I noticed that.
It's the new RUD, rapid, unscheduled disassembly.
Jerry White kind of hinted on that. He says, this could well be a repeat of the N1 rocket.
It was, yes.
The thing that got me is they're doing a test. They don't have any payload whatsoever. There's none. They're just testing the rocket. And it sat there for nearly 7 seconds before it even moved.
Well, it was 7 seconds that dug a big hole in the concrete underneath.
Oh, it destroyed everything.
Yeah.
Roberts captured some of the images of it where some of the concrete went through the back of a car. I pulled Google Earth up and measured it. That concrete was going out into the ocean, more than a half a mile away.
Wow. That's quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. But without a payload to sit on the launch pad, I mean, it's probably burning about 30 tons per second. So it had to wait for the weight to reduce down before it had enough power to lift off. What I found interesting, though, is not only the time, like I said, without a payload, imagine it's not even going to lift off if you put a payload on it. Till more than half, it would sit there for a whole minute. You put 100 tons on the thing, you're going to have to wait a whole minute before the thing's even going to leave the launch pad, but there wouldn't be a launch pad left. Then I was watching the acceleration rate at which it got up to where it's going to break the sound barrier and stuff like that, right? And then the total height. I mean, it burnt the entire tank off, and it was, 24 miles up, which is half of what a Saturn V would do.
And then it rotates. Now, think about the weight and the momentum. Isn't that going to tear that apart when it's doing that? Why would it be rolling like that?
Because when you see those little flares coming off there, they lost all their guidance systems. They had nothing left.
Yeah, but then they tried to say that was planned.
Oh, but they said everything was a success because as soon as it cleared the launch pad, everything was gravy after that. Then I was watching Hadfield doing his little thing on the launch. And of course, he went back to, when they're developing aircraft and they had this many crashes and this many failures and this many times before they got it right. Right back to even the Wright brothers, he's talking about how many times they failed before they got one off the ground. So why is it that Apollo never had those problems to go to the moon with? You had a fire, but that wasn't a rocket launch that was happening with Apollo 1. All of the launches never had that problem.
No, none of them. Apollo 6, Apollo 7, Apollo 8, they all went off fine.
Like Apollo 13 had a bit, but I think that was just to sensationalize it.
One fellow made a comment this morning, and he was talking about how easy it seemed for the Apollo program to send 6 of these craft and 2 astronauts down to the lunar surface 6 times. And now we need a space station. Now we're going to need all these modules that they're going to have to put up there. And they're going to do this in 2024 when they didn't need it back in 69. I like what Randy said. And then he goes, 2014, they're supposed to be on the moon. Then it went to 2019. Then it went to 2020. Now it's 2024. But then back in 2014, they were supposed to be on Mars in 2024. That's next year. What's happened?
Well, they're getting back to having difficulty clearing the launch pad. I was watching some other news, and it suddenly struck me that it doesn't matter how much work we do or how much truth we put out there, people really have trouble accepting it because it would actually be quite painful to them. I mean, the space program has been very much like Disney. It involves the imagination. It gets people involved.
Yeah.
It gets them emotionally involved. And if you're working a day-to-day grinding job, you want to believe that mankind is advancing somewhere. Like if you're just going into a factory working every day, you want to come out and you want some entertainment. This also involves the people because they're going, hey, one day there won't be jobs available, this daily grinding job that I have. the future of humanity will be better. That would be a painful revelation for these people to realize that, no, we're not going anywhere. No, this didn't happen. And even worse, the fact that they were actually sucked into this fantasy world that's out there. And it's also just as devastating if it suddenly ground to a halt. They can't shut it off anymore, right? So many people, like, it's almost like a religion to them. It's affecting our educational systems. It's affecting all kinds of areas in which we are now stagnated, because people coming out of universities, whatever, they're coming out and they're going into whatever space facilities or highly technical trades. But even in their own field that they're working in, they can't even justify it. Like these guys that are trying to build a spacesuit, they're going, how the hell come we can't do it today? Why don't we grab the one out of the museum? And some guy at the top going, well, that's old technology. And the same with the rockets. Like, Musk has got enough money, he can certainly pay somebody to get the technology for the rocket engines to produce it. He's at least smart enough not to even think of putting a person inside of one of these vehicles of his. Like, these things are going up, they're blowing up, but there's nobody aboard. Every time they do a test, there's nobody aboard. Oh, yeah, he's got lots of money, he'll put another one up. Well, he's only got the one launch pad, and it's destroyed. He's not going to put one on next month or the month after or whatever, right? They're going to have to figure out how the hell to build a launch pad. This is 2023. You mean to say nobody went to Ellen and said, hey, that launch pad's going to tear up. You're going to need to put a hell of a lot more water on it to suppress it. I mean, he's got the entire ocean there. He's launched a few rockets before. He must know that he needed to build a launch pad capable of doing that, and it completely destroyed it. It's not a little bit destroyed, it's completely destroyed. I mean, the chunks of concrete flying out of there were just unbelievable. The one that hit the back of the car, I haven't measured that. That car was maybe 450 feet away from the launch pad. That's all it was. And the piece of it just hit the back of the car. It probably went halfway through it. When you look at that and say, why can't he do that? This is 2023. He's been doing this for, nearly 20 years? And he doesn't know how? Like, if he's going to increase the engines, he's got to put more water on it to suppress it or whatever. As far as I see, it didn't look like he had any suppression. And then claiming the amount of thrust that he had, was that 11 million pounds or something he was pushing there? Each one is supposed to be maxed out at 500,000, right? If there was 29 of them under there was supposed to be 32, but I guess if there's 29. But that isn't enough to lift off an empty rocket, like no payload. I mean, what's going on? Is there 11 million pounds there? It certainly damaged the launch pad.
There's quite a lot of power coming out of that rocket.
Oh, yeah. And of course, with the fuel that he's using, then NASA just turns around, they're still using the same fuel, and then they just claim, well, we just upgraded our engine, so we got as much as he's got for the SLS. But there's only 4 engines under there.
Yeah, and 2 solid fuel boosters on the side, 2 million pounds each.
They went from 200,000 pounds to 500,000 pounds on the other engine, and the guy just said, well, yeah, we designed the rocket engine so they're upgradable. They could never do it before. It's just, they make a statement like that, and people believe it.
Yeah, but don't forget, NASA were doing this in 1968 with Apollo 8, assuming you believe it was real, which I don't. So NASA were doing it all. They didn't have rockets that didn't work. Yeah, they had a small problem with Apollo 1, but beyond that, it was all tickety-boo. It went fine. They tested it all, no problems at all. They even tested the heat shield. They brought it back. Iran has only had 1 test of its heat shield.
And after all of that stuff in the 1960s, then they just started using Russian rockets. Even Musk has been using Russian rockets up until this.
There's something very wrong with the whole story of Apollo, of not just Apollo, but of space travel. Because if it was so easy to do it 50 years ago, why is it so hard today? It makes no sense. That's not the way technology works. Musk has got a big group of people working for him. He's sort of more cheering away. And he's got his contract with NASA, so he's got several $1 billion of contracts to launch their satellites or whatever it is they're doing. So he's got a good cash flow, but it's still got to get the rocket to work. And the rocket didn't appear to work. You know, it went up, yeah, it went up, we saw it. Was it 2 minutes after it launched, or 4 minutes after it launched?
That's the other thing. There's all of the fuel is being consumed within the first couple of minutes. They're not even closely. You're 24 miles up.
That's not very far, is it?
How are you even going to get to low Earth orbit with that thing? That's what people don't understand. It's all consumed for show. And after that, it goes in the ocean.
The idea that America was told at the time of Apollo, this is the greatest thing since the creation. That was Nixon's line. And because it was America, everybody cheered and believed it and thought, wow, this is great. You know, America's on top of the world. We've beaten the Russians. So they repeat it. Every anniversary, they repeat the wonderfulness of Apollo. So people continue to believe it. The trouble is that America is now the only country in the world that believes it. China doesn't believe it. India doesn't believe it. Most of Europe don't believe it. Africa couldn't care less.
You see, back in the 50s and 60s, people were brought up in a different environment. They truly believed in what their parents told them, what their teachers told them, what the government told them, right? And when they started putting this program together, it's because part of that was falling apart, you know, disagreeing with the government and the other problems they had in the States, right? They needed something to unify them, to put it back together, to bring back the American dream. And they did that. The money was well spent because it brought the country back together with a unified vision. Just because the vision wasn't real, just because it was no more than what Disney could have done. The thing is that they brought that up, and it has filtered through their educational system, it has filtered through the political systems, it has filtered through everything, and through business and industry. And I don't mean filtered through, I mean financially infected them. And there's nothing wrong with having that industry. They can be trying to do whatever. They can be honestly trying to do it. But their accomplishments aren't any greater than what we saw the other day with SpaceX. They cleared the launch pad. That was it.
Yeah, they wrecked it.
These poor guys that honestly believe that man has gone anywhere, and these guys are working in a laboratory or whatever facility, trying to build a capsule, trying to build a spacesuit, trying to build any EVA equipment, right? Trying to get the communications to work properly and everything else. And the very few people in there know what the actual barriers are. The rest of the guys in there are like trying like crazy, and they're in full denial. Like, say, we see these comments, and, oh, well, my husband's a university professor and he does research in the space industry. That's all fine and dandy. We understand that you believe. It would be far too painful for you to come to reality and realize that we haven't done anything like we've been told we've been done. And yeah, you can work in your laboratory, you can work in your universities. You actually have the equipment is there if you want to test it. And that's what we've got is testing vacuum equipment, right? And it's going to show us what happens when materials get into a vacuum. And it's not just one or two. I mean, just the example of showing how the vacuum chamber is constructed shows you what actually needs to happen if you are in space. And the fact that you just can't open a door and shut it again. It's going to get new seals first. It's going to need maintenance to open and shut a door. Marcus, did you ever watch Space Force?
No, I didn't. No.
With Steve Carell? Oh, it's hilarious. It's on Netflix. In the scene, the solar panels had become detached from whatever satellite. And they have a monkey and a dog, and they get the monkey into a suit to do an EVA over to go attach the solar panels back on. And of course, it all gets messed up.
That looks good. I think it's showing what can be done, or what was done.
There goes the monkey. He flies off. He turns the drill, and the monkey gets screwed around and takes off. It breaks the tether, and he's gone. And then, of course, the Chinese pick him up.
That still is very strange. how you can use these spacesuits for the Apollo missions, and there's absolutely no structure in there compared to what you'd see on the ISS, and yet they supposedly worked. I mean, I still, that's a mystery to me. It still is. And it seems to be that if you put anything in a chamber down here and you try doing the same thing in space, you get a different result. So that means that space has to be different than it is down here on Earth in a chamber. Now, of course, the Birdie Bunch say that it is the same. So then why don't the suits react the same when they're in space? That's what I don't get. So there's something not right here.
The biggest example that you can go is just back to the Sandusky chamber. Why don't they have people running around in there in their spacesuits all day long, every day?
It's a good place to test it. I mean, that goes down to 10 to the minus 6, doesn't it?
Yeah, they can test the suits. They can bring all the equipment in and test it in there, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, of course they can.
Right. They just need to put an airlock on it. I mean, the door now only weighs 150 tons.
But all they have to do is put a suit in there. Just fill it with 3.5 psi, put it in the chamber when they're testing something else. It doesn't have to be just all by itself, but just when they're doing something else, they could do that.
Maybe the fact that when Bill said, no, you can't put anything inside the chamber that would explode because it's going to wreck those turbo pumps. Maybe that's too much material going in, even on a chamber that large, if you're putting that kind of gas into it. And that atmosphere hits those turbo pumps because they're basically in that vacuum. Like they got to be down. When they start to wind up from -3 and start to pull it down farther, if you have something blow up in there and you get all those molecules there and they hit those fan blades, right?
I mean, come on, they have so much money. Look at how much they've damaged in the past. Look at the damage they've caused. Look at the damage to towers. Look at the damage done to buildings when that Saturn V took off. And you're telling me that they're going to ruin a turbo pump?
It might take out the side of the building, the speed those things are running at.
Just see, there's always an excuse. Like, it just doesn't stop. That's the point. They're always going to have an excuse.
It was never done right in the first place. They didn't do the proper testing. So they don't know what's going to happen. It can't be seen now to have to go back and do what they should have done 60 years ago. And because they didn't do it 60 years ago, they have to cover it up. That's the problem that NASA have got. They can't admit to any of the difficulties because they never did it correctly the first time. They said they had these spacesuits. They said they had all the equipment, they had the rovers, and they told us it had all been tested, but they never showed us it being tested. They just said it has been tested. And now they have to actually do it. They can't be seen to it because the first question anybody is going to ask is, well, didn't you do this 60 years ago? What's the problem today? And if people start asking those sort of questions, NASA are in a real difficulty. NASA have got to come clean and say, sorry guys, you were misled. It was all to do with the Cold War. We had to be seen to win the Cold War, but we can't. It's a tragic situation. They will have to explain what actually did happen and start from the beginning.
But when they come out and sit there and make ridiculous statements like that, they're being taught that. They cannot ask these people to come out and produce anything of any value if you can't teach orbital mechanics to them. There's no way they're going to work in the space program. They're just part of the propaganda resource that they're using.
They're not working in the physics department. They're not doing the hard graft of science. They're doing the soft propaganda, and it's been very successful. Like the heading behind you, Man on the Moon, is one of the most successful propaganda campaigns of the last 60 years, because people still believe it. That is what's so tragic about it. Yesterday, I was at a meeting. It was a meeting to do with something quite different, and I got to ask a few questions. Is anybody, there were about 25 people present. I said, does anybody here believe that humans have landed on the moon? No, not one person was prepared to answer that positively. They said, when we see what's going on now, it's a bit doubtful. You know, that people in England, so they don't have the emotional attachment that people in America do. If I asked that question of Americans, probably 80% would say, yeah, of course they did, I saw it on television. Or was that effect? But people have now looked at it, listened to the arguments, because I tend not to shut up about it. If anybody asks me, I'll go off on it and I'll tell them, well, look at this. You know, I can prove that no humans have landed on the moon, and this is the reason why. And they say, yeah, I understand what you're talking about. That makes sense. That's all it is. Because anybody who thinks that humans have landed on the moon have to explain three things. How do they overcome the heat? How do they overcome the radiation? And how do they deal with the vacuum? That's all. It's three things. Answer those questions.
And in 1969, pretty much everything else about the technology that didn't exist at the time, they would have needed to have.
Yeah, exactly. And look at the problem they're having now. 2023, just getting a rocket off the ground without destroying the launch tower or the launch site. I mean, the Germans were launching V2 rockets. They weren't very powerful compared to the SLS and the Starship. They weren't as powerful as that. 25 tons the V2 produced. And they had a special device under the rocket which deflected the heat. It was a portable rocket, because they could put the same thing into place no matter where it was being launched from. You get a 3,000-ton rocket, you can't move it around very easily, but you could still produce a flame trench below it and cool it with enough water. I mean, where Musk is launching it, the ocean's just down the road. Was it half a mile away? Some of that water in?
The ocean's about a quarter of a mile away. The stuff was going out about a half a mile out into the ocean.
Yeah.
I pulled that up on Google Earth. I mean, he's right down at the end of Texas, which is very close to the border of Mexico. So he's wrapped right around the Caribbean, right down on the side there, pretty much the west coast of the Caribbean. His main control room and all of the other stuff is about a mile or so away.
It's a bit closer than the Apollo command rooms.
Their main building was maybe 3/4 of a mile away from the launch pad where they rolled it out from. But that thing was built something else, right? Like those people that said, oh, we stayed there and peeked around this corner of the building when they were going there. And meantime, Walter Cronkite's 3 miles away and the building's coming down around him. And it was supposed to be a media bunker. And then they had to tear those buildings down. I mean, you got to realize, though, that we can only talk about that because methane gas and oxygen, oxyacetylene, whatever they were using there, oxidizer and stuff in their fuel, the LOX, is quite a bit different the way it burns. Like, not saying that they aren't noisy, but I imagine the methane's a lot quieter.
That point you made about the sound, the level of sound produced by the Apollo rockets, and you got the astronauts 300 foot up in the air, they're going to be affected by that sound.
When the sound is 8 times louder than what it takes to kill you, yeah.
You'd think that they might have been affected, but they didn't appear to be. Yet another anomaly.
Yeah, they were talking back and forth at 70 decibels inside the craft. Absolutely impossible. Those are just minor little things of details that point out that never happened. Those are errors in simulation. Because even the movie industry knows to do that.
So they do now.
Even in the 60s, when you step on the gas, they made a squealing sound of tires, even if it was on gravel.
It's been a bit strange then. How do you get squealing tires like on gravel?
They just sped the camera up and they made squealing tires on pavement, and even if they were on gravel.
That's what people expect to hear, isn't it?
That's what they expect to hear, so that's what you see. You don't think twice about it, right?
So when you launch a rocket, you expect a lot of noise, a lot of smoke, a lot of steam, and the thing disappears. That's what you expect to see.
Yeah, but they missed it in the audio.
Yeah, you put people permanently 300 foot above the rocket engines and vibrating, yes.
It's going to travel through their body. Their voice is going to be shaking with the vibration.
But it never is it?
Randolph, when you're clear to try, I got a pitch and a roll program, and this baby is really going. 20 seconds. That's a lovely liftoff. That's not bad at all. Everything's looking great. Sky's getting lighter.
Like the launch from the lunar surface, where they're talking as if they're doing yet another simulation in a computer somewhere on Earth, which is probably what it was.
Good liftoff. Automatic.
They weren't in a rocket on the moon. They couldn't have been. We'd have heard it.
And you could tell they're reading a script.
Yeah, they probably practiced reading it a bit. I mean, they were quite good. So if anybody listening to this thinks that humans have landed on the moon, please show your workings. How do you know they did? Where is the evidence?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that nobody comes forward. And you would think after all these years that somebody would come forward from NASA and say, hey, let's set the record straight. We went to the moon, and this is how, and this is the evidence we've got. And anybody that has tried it, say, well, we got some moon rocks.
Yeah, we got moon rocks. Oh, wow.
Where are my moon rocks to compare with your moon rocks? They're just rocks.
And my moon rock. I've got a piece of moon rock.
Where's the radiation? Oh, the moon doesn't have irradiated moon rocks. Bullshit.
Of course it does. It's got no protection.
I read an article that said the moon has 42% moisture in the soil.
How do you prove that? But it's in a vacuum. Liquid cannot survive in a vacuum.
Well, that's what they claim.
Claim anything they like. They can claim they landed humans on the moon.
And that moisture stays in the soil when it hits 130 degrees Celsius, where water boils up, right?
Yeah, of course it does.
And they still claim that it's there. And then you have to say, how much can you shovel? How much do people believe? And then you have to look at the educational system, right? The people can't put two and two together. They don't realize that moisture isn't going to be there when it's above 100 degrees Celsius. It's going to boil off. That's before you get to the vacuum, which creates the exact same effect. Like a small percentage of people would understand that. But when you add the two together and they still say it, and they put it out to their colleagues, and they tell them that this is a fact, and then those colleagues are university teachers and they go in and teach it. And that's just one example of the many fallacies that they are teaching. And that just simply means that they cannot advance because these people have been taught so much incorrect information. There's no way, you can't fix it. You'd shock their system. You imagine walking into an industry and they go, everything you learned in that university is garbage. There's no way you can correct all of it.
People will gradually come to the realization, it's that famous quote, men go mad in crowds and regain their sanity one by one. It's that simple. It just takes people to step back just a little bit, just step back a little bit from this belief system and look at it logically and scientifically. There's no conspiracy involved at all. It's science. That's all you need to use.
That rocket, I don't care. It doesn't have nearly enough power. Just wait until they put a payload on it.
150 tons they're supposed to carry on the Starliner.
Yeah, and then how many launches are they going to need to put up if they're going to go anywhere?
Yeah, they've got to get the refueling rockets up as well. Didn't do that on Apollo, did they? No refueling on Apollo, but they're going to have to do it this time. Doesn't add up. Add up.